Have you ever felt like you were standing in the ruins of someone else's life, tasked with sorting through the pieces, when all you really wanted to do was walk away? It's a heavy feeling, isn't it? The weight of a legacy you never asked for. Today's story is about a woman named Mai, who was handed the keys to a past she didn't understand, only to find it was the key to her entire future. This is a story about roots, the kind that ground you, and the kind that corporations try to rip out of the soil and sell back to you in a pretty bottle. Welcome to Revenge Pains. I'm your narrator, Serena, and trust me, you're going to want to see how this one unfolds. It's a reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't about burning bridges, but about building a garden so strong, so vibrant, that it outshines everything else. The air in the office was the color of a washed-out sky, a pale, sterile gray that clung to everything. It was a high-rise cathedral of minimalism, where the only sound was the gentle hum of servers and the quiet, rhythmic tapping of keyboards. Linh Tran, or Mai as everyone had called her since she decided Linh was too Vietnamese for her corporate climb, stared at the screen. She was nudging a pixel, a single blue dot in a logo for a cloud storage company she couldn't care less about. The color had to be just right, a shade of blue that supposedly evoked trust, but to her just looked like surrender. Her world was one of clean lines, billable hours, and the quiet satisfaction of a perfectly aligned vector. It was orderly. It was safe. It was a million miles away from the chaotic, fragrant world she had run from. Then her phone buzzed, a tiny vibration against the cold glass of her desk. A text from her mother. It was a photo, and the image that filled her screen was a shock of color against the muted palette of her day. It was her grandmother's shop, V letter 1B0, letter 1EDD, and THU letter 1ED1CC letter 1E7, a bag grandma's medicine garden. The faded green awning, the chaotic jumble of potted herbs spilling onto the sidewalk, the hand-painted sign with its elegant, curling Vietnamese script. It was a splash of vibrant, untamed life in a city that was rapidly paving over anything that didn't fit into a neat, profitable box. Beneath the photo, a simple line of text. "The keys are with the lawyer. We need you to handle it." Mai let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Handle it. Such a simple phrase for such an impossible task. She looked from the photo of the messy, beautiful shop to the sterile perfection of her office, the two worlds separated by a pane of glass and a lifetime of choices. The weight of that little building, of the life lived within it, settled onto her shoulders, heavier than any deadline. She had built this life for herself, this clean, orderly existence. And now, the past was calling, smelling of dried ginseng and bitter melon, asking her to come home and dismantle it piece by piece. The key felt alien in her hand, old and heavy, its teeth worn smooth with a century of use. When Mai pushed open the door to her grandmother's apothecary, a bell chimed, a frail, tinny sound that echoed in the sudden silence. The air that rushed out to greet her wasn't just air. It was a physical presence, a dense, layered perfume of the earth. It smelled of dried roots and bitter leaves, of sweet star anise and pungent camphor, all steeped in the faint, dusty scent of old paper and wood. It was the smell of her childhood, a scent she had spent her entire adult life trying to wash away. The shop was a living time capsule. Sunlight, thick with dancing dust motes, streamed through the front window, illuminating a world untouched by her sleek, modern sensibilities. The walls were lined, floor to ceiling, with hundreds of small wooden drawers, each one bearing a label handwritten in her grandmother's elegant, looping Vietnamese script. She could only recognize a few characters. Nhan Sam for ginseng, Hoa Kuk for chrysanthemum. Most were a mystery, a language she had let fade. Above her, bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling like strange, brittle chandeliers, casting long, dancing shadows on the worn wooden floor. On the counter, glass jars held murky tinctures and preserved botanicals, things that looked like coiled serpents and dried seahorses sleeping in amber liquid. Mai felt like an intruder, a tourist in the landscape of her own heritage. This wasn't her world. Her world was hex codes and kerning, not decoctions and poultices. Her plan was simple, clinical. Liquidate the inventory, sell the property, and get back to her life. A clean break. The gentrification wave sweeping through Little Saigon made it a seller's market. Her real estate agent, a brisk woman named Carol with a sharp suit and a sharper smile, had been practically salivating over the phone. A corner lot in this neighborhood, Lynn. It's a gold mine. Developers are desperate for properties with this kind of authentic character. Authentic character. The phrase had made Mai flinch. To Carol, it was a selling point. To Mai, it was a mountain of work she didn't know how to begin climbing. She started with a box, taping the bottom with a loud screech that felt like a sacrilege in the quiet space. She pulled a jar of dried goji berries from a shelf, the label written in her grandmother's hand. She remembered Ba scooping these into her palm as a child, calling them red diamonds. She hated them. Too chewy, too earthy. Now she just saw inventory. She placed the jar in the box. One down. Hundreds, maybe thousands, to go. The bell chimed again. An older woman with kind, wrinkled eyes and a cloud of silver hair stood in the doorway. It was Mrs. Nguyen, who ran the pho restaurant next door, a place that had been there as long as the apothecary. She wiped her hands on her apron, her eyes scanning the shop with a deep, sorrowful affection. "Mai," she said, her voice soft. "Your grandmother, she was a healer, not just of the body." Mrs. Nguyen walked over to a specific drawer, pulling it open without hesitation. The scent of cinnamon and cloves wafted out. "When my husband passed, I couldn't sleep for months. Your Ba, she didn't just give me herbs. She sat with me. For hours. She made me this tea," she said, gesturing to the contents of the drawer. "She held my hand and told me that grief was a visitor who would eventually leave, but only if I was a gracious host. She had a wisdom the new world doesn't have time for." She looked at Mai, at the cardboard box in her hands, and her expression was a painful mix of pity and hope. "What will you do with this place, little one? A modern girl like you?" The question hung in the air, thick as the scent of herbs. Mai wanted to say, "I'm selling it, I'm moving on." But looking into Mrs. Nguyen's eyes, eyes that held the history of this entire community, the words felt cheap. They felt like a betrayal. She offered a weak smile instead. "I'm just sorting things out for now, Mrs. Nguyen." It was a lie, of course. For the next few days, she continued her methodical purge, treating the shop like a storage unit to be cleared. Other elders stopped by, each with a story. Mr. Tran from the bakery, whose infant son's colic was soothed by one of Ba's remedies. Mrs. La, who swore by a tincture that had cleared her skin before her wedding 40 years ago. They all spoke of her grandmother not as a shopkeeper, but as a pillar, a keeper of stories and secrets. They pleaded with her, in their gentle, indirect way, to keep the shop open. "This place is the heart of our street," they'd say. "It remembers for us." Mai listened, she nodded, but she didn't hear. She saw their pleas as nostalgia, a beautiful but impractical sentiment in the face of rising property taxes and the ruthless efficiency of the modern world. Selling was the logical choice. It was the only choice that made sense. She had an Excel spreadsheet on her laptop mapping it all out. Potential buyers, closing costs, net profit. It was clean, simple, and free of the messy, complicated emotions that filled this dusty old shop. One afternoon, while she was sorting through a crate of what looked like petrified mushrooms, she found a stack of old ledgers. Tucked inside the last one was a smaller book, bound in worn, dark leather. There was no title. She opened it, and the familiar, elegant script of her grandmother flowed across the page. It was a journal. The first few pages were recipes, detailed instructions for remedies, but as she turned the pages, it changed. It became a chronicle of people, of the community. Names she recognized. Mrs. Nguyen, Mr. Tran, were written alongside notes about their lives, their sorrows, their small joys. She flipped to a random page in the middle. The Vietnamese was dense, but on the opposite page, in a different ink, her grandmother had written in careful, deliberate English. Perhaps for her, Mai realized with a pang. "Our roots are not anchors to hold us back," she read, "but a foundation from which to grow." Below it, another line. "Some people will see our garden and only want to sell the flowers, forgetting the strength is in the roots." Mai traced the words with her finger. It was beautiful, poetic. It was also, she thought, the kind of thing people embroidered on pillows. She closed the journal, the weight of it feeling heavier than its size suggested. It was sentimental. It was lovely. But it didn't change the numbers on her spreadsheet. She placed the journal in the box with her grandmother's personal effects, another artifact to be stored away, and went back to the practical, necessary work of erasure. She didn't yet understand that the words weren't a memory. They were a warning. The bell on the door chimed, not with the gentle entrance of a neighbor, but with a crisp, decisive sound. The man who entered didn't belong in the apothecary. He was a creature of glass and steel, dressed in a suit so perfectly tailored it seemed molded to his body. His shoes gleamed, and his smile was a bright, white, confident thing. He glided through the cluttered space with a predatory grace, his eyes scanning everything, not with reverence, but with the cool, calculating gaze of an appraiser. "Lin Tran?" he asked, his voice smooth and warm, a practiced empathy that set my teeth on edge. "I'm Preston Holloway, CEO of Aura Wellness." He extended a hand, and Mai took it reluctantly. His grip was firm, his skin strangely smooth. "I was so sorry to hear about your grandmother," he continued, his tone dripping with sincerity. "She was a legend in the wellness community, a true pioneer." Mai raised an eyebrow. "I don't think my ba ever used the word wellness." Holloway chuckled, a sound like ice cubes rattling in a crystal glass. "Of course not. She was authentic, the real deal. That's why I'm here. I have such a deep, profound respect for traditional practices like hers." He gestured around the shop, a sweeping motion that took in the hanging herbs, the wooden drawers, the very soul of the place. This is history, it's culture, and it deserves to be preserved, celebrated even." Mai remained silent, her arms crossed over her chest. She had a feeling this wasn't a condolence call. "My company, Aura Wellness," he went on, "is launching a new line. We're calling it Ancient Roots. It's about bringing these powerful, time-tested remedies to a new generation in a way they can understand and trust." He pulled a tablet from a slim leather briefcase and swiped the screen. An image appeared, a sleek, hypermodern storefront. It was her grandmother's shop, but stripped of all its character. The green awning was gone, replaced by a minimalist sign in a sans-serif font, Aura. The windows were vast and empty, showcasing a sterile, white interior. "We want to honor your grandmother's legacy," Holloway said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We want to make this shop the flagship location for the entire line, the heart of the brand." He swiped again, showing images of beautifully packaged products, minimalist glass jars with trendy pastel labels. The names were in English. Serenity Brew, Golden Radiance, Dreamweaver. "What is Golden Radiance?" Mai asked, pointing to a jar of bright yellow powder. "That's our proprietary turmeric blend," he said with a brilliant smile, "for inflammation and vitality." Proprietary. He said it as if he'd invented it. He was a colonizer in a $1,000 suit. "Which brings me to my offer," Holloway said, finally getting to the point. He named a number, an all-cash offer that was significantly higher than the real estate agent's most optimistic estimate. It was a staggering amount, enough to pay off her student loans, put a down payment on a condo, and never worry about a freelance gig again. It was an easy way out, a golden ticket back to her orderly life with a hefty profit to show for it. The practical, spreadsheet-loving part of her brain screamed at her to take it. It was a gift. It was freedom. But then Holloway did something that changed everything. He reached over to the counter, to the box of personal effects Mai had set aside, and picked up her grandmother's leather-bound journal. He hefted it in his hand, a speculative look in his eyes. "This is incredible," he said, flipping through the pages of her elegant script. "The stories, the knowledge. This is fantastic content. We could digitize this for the website, create a whole narrative around it. The Grandma's Wisdom blog. It'll be huge." Content. He called her grandmother's life, her wisdom, her legacy. Content. A spark of indignation, hot and fierce, ignited deep within Mai. It was a feeling she hadn't felt in a very long time. It was the feeling of a line being crossed. This wasn't preservation. This was appropriation. This was stripping a culture for parts, polishing them until they were unrecognizable, and selling them at a markup. He saw her grandmother's garden, and all he wanted to do was sell the flowers. The spreadsheet in her mind dissolved. The number he had offered suddenly seemed insignificant. She looked him directly in the eye, her voice quiet but unwavering. "Mr. Holloway, thank you for your generous offer, but the shop is not for sale." His smile tightened, just for a second, a barely perceptible flicker of annoyance before the mask of empathy snapped back into place. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Take your time. Grieving is a process. My offer stands. When you're ready to be practical, give me a call." He placed his card on the counter next to the journal and glided out of the shop, the bell chiming his departure. Mai stood there for a long time, her heart pounding. She looked down at the journal, at her grandmother's handwriting. For the first time, she didn't just see an artifact. She saw a legacy. And she realized with a terrifying clarity that if she didn't protect it, no one would. Now, this is the moment in so many stories where the hero makes a clear-cut decision. But let's be real, life isn't like that. Holloway's offer was gone, but the problems weren't. Mai was left standing in a dusty, unprofitable shop, having just turned down a life-changing amount of money out of. What? Pride. A sudden, inconvenient surge of familial duty. The debate that rages inside you at a moment like that, between the practical and the emotional, can be absolutely brutal. Have you ever been there? Caught between what your head is screaming is the smart move, and what your heart is whispering might be the right one. That's where Mai was, and the fight was just getting started. Preston Holloway's polite demeanor vanished the moment Mai's refusal settled in. He wasn't a man accustomed to hearing the word no. A week later, a construction crew began work on the vacant storefront directly across the street. A few days after that, a slick vinyl sign was plastered across the windows, printed in the same minimalist font from his tablet, Aura Wellness. Coming soon. It was a declaration of war. Then the digital assault began. Mai's phone started buzzing with notifications from the shop's long-dormant Yelp page. One-star reviews, suddenly flooding in from accounts with no other activity. Place is filthy, one read. Smells weird. The old lady who ran it gave me something that made my stomach hurt. Avoid, another claimed. This isn't medicine, it's witchcraft, unhygienic and dangerous. The words were poison, carefully chosen to prey on modern fears of the unregulated and the unknown. The final blow came in the form of a blog post. A popular local wellness influencer, a woman with tens of thousands of followers who posted glossy photos of green juice and yoga poses, published an article titled, "The Hidden Dangers of Your Neighborhood Herbalist." It was a masterpiece of fear-mongering, full of vague warnings about untested remedies and archaic practices. And there, prominently featured at the top of the article, was a beautifully shot, high-contrast photo of her grandmother's shop, making it look sinister and dilapidated. Mai knew, with a sickening certainty, that this blogger hadn't stumbled upon the story by chance. She could almost see the wire transfer from Aura Wellness in her mind. The pressure was immense. Her family, who had initially been supportive of her taking time to sort things out, was now frantic. "Mai, what are you doing?" her mother pleaded over the phone. "This man is a millionaire. He will crush you. Take the money he offered. It's what your ba would have wanted. She wouldn't want you to ruin your life for a building." Her practical side, the part of her that made spreadsheets and met deadlines, was screaming in agreement. Sell. Run. Save yourself the fight. This was a battle she couldn't win. She was a graphic designer with a dusty shop full of herbs she couldn't identify, going up against a corporate giant with a team of lawyers and a bottomless marketing budget. It was insane. But every time she pictured Holloway's smug, polished face, every time she remembered him holding her grandmother's journal and calling her legacy content, a hot, stubborn anger burned in her chest. Selling now wouldn't just be a business decision. It would be a surrender. It would be an admission that he was right, that her grandmother's life's work was nothing more than a commodity to be bought and sold. It felt like a profound betrayal, not just of her grandmother, but of Mrs. Nguyen, of Mr. Tran, of the entire community that saw the shop as their heart. That night, unable to sleep, Mai went back to the small apartment above the shop where her grandmother had lived. The air was still and smelled of her ba's favorite jasmine soap. She pulled out the leather-bound journal, not as an artifact this time, but as a lifeline. She sat on the floor, switched on a small lamp, and began to read. She didn't just read the recipes. She read the stories tucked in the margins. She read about the winter a flu swept through the neighborhood, and her grandmother had stayed up for 3 nights straight, brewing broths and teas, delivering them door to door, refusing any payment. She read about a young couple who couldn't conceive, and the delicate, year-long treatment of herbs and dietary changes her grandmother had prescribed, culminating in a joyful entry. "Today, they brought their baby girl to meet me." They named her Lan, after the orchids she loves. She read about neighbors who'd lost their jobs, and her grandmother had quietly given them credit, sometimes for years, writing off the debt with a simple note. "Family helps family." This journal wasn't just a collection of remedies, it was a testament to a life of service. It was a record of a community's pains and triumphs, its heartbreaks and its hopes. This shop wasn't just a building, it was the physical manifestation of her grandmother's love. It was the heart of little Saigon. It was the last living piece of her ba. As the sun began to rise, casting a soft, gray light into the room, Mai closed the journal. The debate was over. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a powerful, unshakable resolve. Her mother was wrong. Her grandmother wouldn't have wanted her to sell. Her grandmother would have wanted her to fight. And so would she. She wasn't just defending a property anymore. She was defending a legacy. To fight a war, you need allies. Mai knew she couldn't do this alone. She was a stranger in her own community, an outsider who had spent years trying to assimilate, to shed the very identity she now so desperately needed to understand. She needed a guide, a translator, and she found one in the most unexpected of places. His name was Bao, and he ran a local blog called Saigon Stories. It was a small but passionate project dedicated to preserving the history of the neighborhood, featuring interviews with old-timers and articles about the cultural significance of everything from the local noodle shops to the fading murals on the alley walls. He was young, probably a few years younger than her, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through the carefully constructed corporate armor she wore. He was a history student, a community activist, and, initially, a major skeptic. He had reached out for an interview after the first negative Yelp reviews appeared, his email polite but pointed. He wanted to know about her plans for the shop, the iconic V letter 1B0, letter 1EDD, and THU letter 1ED1CC letter 1E7 ABA. When he arrived, he didn't carry a fancy camera, just a small digital recorder and a notebook. He looked around the shop, his gaze lingering on the drawers, the herbs, his expression unreadable. "So," he began, getting straight to the point, "the rumor is you're selling out to the big wellness company across the street." His tone wasn't accusatory, just direct. He was testing her. Mai bristled. "I'm not selling out to anyone." "But you were going to sell," he countered, "before Holloway showed up." She couldn't deny it. "My life is somewhere else. I didn't think. I didn't understand what this place meant." Bao nodded slowly, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. "Most of us our age don't. We're the generation in between. Too modern to be like our parents, too Vietnamese to be fully American. We're all trying to figure out where we fit." He looked her in the eye. "So what changed your mind? What's your intention now?" It was a tough question, the kind that demanded more than a simple answer. And in that moment, Mai decided to be honest. She told him everything. About Holloway's insulting offer, his plan to turn her grandmother's legacy into content. She even showed him the journal, her voice catching as she read the line about the roots and the flowers. As she spoke, she saw the skepticism in Bao's eyes soften, replaced by a glimmer of understanding, and then respect. He wasn't just a blogger looking for a story, he was a fellow guardian of the culture. "He's not the first," Bao said when she finished. "These companies, they circle our communities like vultures. They see our traditions, our food, our medicine, and they see a branding opportunity. They don't want the roots. They're too messy, too complicated. They just want the pretty flowers they can sell." He had echoed her grandmother's words, her own thoughts, perfectly. In that moment, he went from being an interviewer to an ally. He became her guide. He taught her the unspoken rules of the community. He explained that you don't just ask the elders for help. You earn their trust first. You show up. You listen. You bring them gifts of fruit from the market. He took her to the community garden, introducing her to the women who grew the very herbs her grandmother had used. He helped her translate the more obscure passages in the journal, his knowledge of history and language filling in the gaps in her own. Their conversations, initially focused on strategy, began to drift. He told her about his parents, boat people who had sacrificed everything to give him a life in America. She told him about the pressures she'd felt to succeed, to prove that their sacrifice wasn't in vain, even if it meant sanding down the edges of her own identity. Theirs was a relationship born in a foxhole, a deep friendship forged under fire. He grounded her, connected her, and gave her the emotional support she so desperately needed. With Bao by her side, she was no longer an outsider fighting a lonely battle. She was a part of something, She was finally, truly coming home. The next morning, Mai walked outside, took a deep breath of the cool city air, and ripped the real estate agent's for sale sign from the post where she had tentatively placed it. The sound of the cardboard tearing was deeply, profoundly satisfying. It was a definitive act, a crossing of a threshold. There was no going back now. Her first move wasn't one of attack. It was one of creation. She was a designer, after all. She understood the power of a narrative, of controlling your own story. That night, fueled by strong coffee and a newfound sense of purpose, she did what she did best. She designed. She built a website for V letter 1B0, letter 1EDD, and THU letter 1ED1CC letter 1E7 ABA. It wasn't slick or corporate. It was beautiful, simple, and rich with history. She used an elegant serif font that mimicked her grandmother's handwriting. She took high-resolution photos of the shop, not hiding the dust or the worn wood, but celebrating them. She captured the light streaming through the jars, the texture of the dried leaves, the deep, earthy colors of the roots. She made the shop look not old, but timeless. Then she started an Instagram account. Her first post was a clean, beautiful shot of her grandmother's open journal. The caption was simple. First, in Vietnamese. S letter 1E9C, M letter 1E1NH, N letter 1EB1M, letter 1EDF, G letter 1ED1C, R letter 1EC5. And then the English translation. The strength is in the roots. She followed it with a short, heartfelt announcement. She explained that she was her grandmother's successor and that she was reopening the shop, but not just as a business. It was going to be a place for community learning, a space dedicated to preserving and sharing the knowledge that had been passed down through generations. She was inviting people in, not just to buy, but to learn, to share, to remember. It was a declaration of her new mission. She was stepping into the upside-down world of her grandmother, a world that valued community over profit, wisdom over branding. She was taking her modern skills, her eye for design, her understanding of social media, and putting them in service of an ancient tradition. She was no longer Linh Tran, the corporate graphic designer. She was Mai, her grandmother's granddaughter, the keeper of the garden. She had entered the new world, and she was ready for the fight. The war against Aura Wellness wasn't going to be won with lawsuits or shouting matches. Mai knew she couldn't compete on Preston Holloway's terms. He had more money, more lawyers, and more influence. So she had to change the battlefield. Her revenge would be creative, constructive, and deeply authentic. It would be everything his brand pretended to be. With Bao as her strategist and community liaison, she launched her counteroffensive. It began in the small, sun-drenched garden behind the shop, a patch of earth her grandmother had lovingly tended for 50 years. They decided to host free weekend workshops. Their first one was titled The Art of the Sleepy Tea. They put up a simple, hand-painted sign. To their surprise, nearly 20 people showed up that first Saturday, a mix of curious younger people from the neighborhood and elders who came to support the cause. Mrs. Nguyen was their first guest teacher. She sat on a small stool, a basket of dried chrysanthemum, goji berries, and red dates in her lap, and she didn't just list ingredients. She told stories. She spoke of how this tea was for calming the spirit, not just the body. She shared memories of her own mother preparing it for her, as a child in a village outside Hue. Mai filmed the entire session on her phone, not with flashy edits, but with a quiet, observational style that let Mrs. Nguyen's warmth and wisdom shine through. Bao live-streamed it on the new Instagram page. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People left comments like, "This is what wellness really means," and "I feel calmer just watching this." It was the antithesis of Aura's sterile, context-free marketing. It was real. They made the workshops a weekly event. Mr. Tran from the bakery taught a session on using ginger and star anise for digestion. An elderly man who had been a fisherman taught them about the restorative properties of seaweed soup. Each session was a thread, weaving the community closer together, re-establishing the shop as its living heart. Mai took the content they generated and worked her design magic. She created beautiful, simple infographics explaining the science and history behind the remedies, debunking the myths and fear-mongering from the influencer's blog post. She posted them online and printed them out, pasting them in the shop window for passers-by to read. She was educating people, arming them with knowledge. Her biggest idea was the community-supported apothecary box. It was a play on the popular farm-share model. For a monthly subscription fee, members would receive a curated box of seasonal remedies, a detoxing tea for the spring, a cooling herbal spray for the summer, an immunity-boosting broth for the fall. Each box came with a beautifully designed card telling the story of the ingredients and instructions from the elder who had taught the workshop. The CSA box exploded in popularity, especially among younger, health-conscious locals who were craving authenticity and a connection to their culture. It provided a steady stream of income and built a loyal customer base. Mai also started a blog, a digital extension of her grandmother's journal. With her family's blessing, she began sharing translated excerpts, the stories of healing, the moments of community, the quiet wisdom. She intertwined them with her own journey of discovery, writing with a raw honesty about her initial reluctance and her growing love for the world she had inherited. The blog, titled "The Strength is in the Roots," started to gain traction beyond the neighborhood. A local newspaper wrote a glowing feature on her, contrasting her community-first approach with the corporate wellness giant opening across the street. Her online follower count grew from a few hundred to several thousand. Foot traffic to the shop increased. People weren't just coming to buy herbs, they were coming to be a part of the story. Of course, Aura Wellness didn't take this lying down. Their grand opening was a spectacle of corporate PR. They hired a DJ, set up a massive balloon arch, and had brand ambassadors in tight-fitting t-shirts handing out free, herbal shots in tiny plastic cups. The shots were diluted, sugary concoctions that bore little resemblance to the potent brews Mai sold, but they were free and they were trendy. Holloway gave a speech, standing on a temporary stage, his voice amplified by speakers. He talked about synergy and bridging cultures, all while his store stood as a monument to cultural erasure. They flooded social media with sponsored ads, their massive budget ensuring that for every one of Mai's authentic posts, users saw 10 of Aura's glossy ones. It was a constant battle, David versus a Goliath with an MBA and an Instagram account. But Mai had something Holloway could never buy. She had the roots, and they were growing deeper every day. The day the Aura Wellness store opened its doors was like watching a spaceship land in the middle of a historic village. It was all glass and white walls, with recessed lighting that made everything look like it was in a museum. Orchids, devoid of scent, stood in tall vases. The products were arranged on shelves with military precision, their pastel labels facing perfectly forward. The air inside smelled faintly of lemongrass and bleach. It was the sanitized, shrink-wrapped version of culture, palatable for a mass market that wanted tradition without the messiness of actual history. At their grand opening party, Preston Holloway, beaming under the lights, gave a speech to a crowd of influencers and local media. Mai watched from the doorway of her own shop. The warm, earthy scent of her grandmother's whirled a stark contrast to the sterile scene across the street. "We are not here to replace," Holloway announced, his voice oozing a practiced sincerity. "We are here to elevate, to build a bridge from the ancient past to the modern consumer." He then made an announcement that sent a chill down Mai's spine. Aura Wellness had just signed a national distribution deal with a major health food chain. Their Ancient Roots line would be in stores across the country in 6 months. This was a massive escalation. Her fight was no longer a local skirmish over a corner store in Little Saigon. It was now a national battle for the narrative. He was going to take her grandmother's knowledge, repackage it, and sell it to millions, all while the original source, her little shop, withered and died. A wave of dread washed over her. How could she possibly fight that? But just as despair began to set in, her phone buzzed. It was an email from the city council. Bao, with his knowledge of civic processes, had suggested months ago that they apply to have the apothecary designated as an official historical landmark. It had been a long shot, a mountain of paperwork and hearings. Mai had almost forgotten about it. The email was short and to the point. Their application had received preliminary approval. The Historical Preservation Committee would make a final vote in 2 months, but this was a huge victory. It was a public acknowledgement from the city that her grandmother's shop wasn't just a retail space. It was a site of cultural significance. A slow smile spread across Mai's face as she looked back across the street at Holloway's party. He might have the money and the distribution deal, but she had just secured a different kind of validation. The war now had two clear fronts. He was fighting an economic battle for customers, a battle of branding and market share. She was fighting a political battle for legitimacy, a battle for the soul of the community. The lines were drawn, and for the first time, she felt like she had a fighting chance. The historical designation was more than just a plaque on the wall. It was a shield. The preliminary approval was a taste of victory, but it also painted a target on Mai's back. Preston Holloway was not a man who played fair, and now he viewed her not just as a nuisance, but as a genuine threat to his brand's narrative. The attacks from Aura Wellness escalated, becoming more direct and more insidious. First came the price war. Holloway used his corporate buying power to purchase massive quantities of common herbs like ginger, turmeric, and star anise, the very staples of Mai's shop. He then began selling them at Aura as loss leaders, priced so low that Mai couldn't possibly compete without losing money on every sale. It was a classic corporate strangulation tactic, designed to bleed her dry. Loyal customers still came to her for complex remedies, but for everyday ingredients, many were tempted by the artificially low prices across the street. Next, a thick envelope arrived from a high-priced law firm. It was a cease and desist letter. Aura Wellness had filed a frivolous trademark claim on the English-translated names of several common herbal combinations. They now claimed to own the rights to phrases like golden glow for a turmeric paste and sleep cloud for a lotus tea. The letter demanded she immediately stop using these trademark terms in her marketing and on her products. The claims were absurd. It was like trying to trademark the name chicken soup, but defending against them would require lawyers and money, two things she had in very short supply. The online smear campaign intensified. Anonymously sourced complaints were filed with the city's health department, alleging unsanitary conditions. Mai was forced to endure a stressful, surprise inspection. The inspector, a kind and thorough woman, found nothing wrong, of course. The shop was old, but it was immaculate. Mai passed with flying colors, but the process cost her a full day of business and frayed her already strained nerves. The damage, however, was done. Rumors started to circulate, whispered doubts planted by Holloway's campaign. But the most painful attack came from within. The bad guys weren't just the corporate suits anymore. They were people she knew. Some of the younger, more business-minded shop owners in Little Saigon, proprietors of trendy boba shops and modern fusion restaurants, started carrying Aura's products. They saw it as a smart business move. "It's good for business, Mai," one of them, a young man named Kevin who ran a popular bakery, told her apologetically. "Holloway's company brings new customers to the neighborhood. People with money. We have to adapt to survive." The elders saw it as a betrayal. A rift began to form in the community, a jagged crack in the foundation she had been working so hard to strengthen. Arguments broke out at neighborhood association meetings. The unity she had fostered was beginning to crumble under the weight of Holloway's financial pressure. She saw Mrs. Nguyen looking at Kevin's bakery with sad, disappointed eyes, and it felt like a knife in her gut. Mai felt utterly isolated. Her sales dipped as customers were siphoned off by Aura's predatory pricing and the convenience of getting their wellness fix at the same place they got their artisanal bread. The financial pressure was immense. She was burning through her savings just to keep the lights on. It felt like she was fighting a multi-front war and losing on all of them. Holloway wasn't just trying to take her shop. He was systematically tearing her community apart to get it. The final blow came on a gray, rain-slicked afternoon. An official-looking letter arrived from the city. Mai's hands trembled as she opened it. It was from the Historical Preservation Committee. Her heart pounded with a fragile hope. But as her eyes scanned the formal, bureaucratic language, the hope curdled into ice in her stomach. "After careful review and consideration of new information provided," the letter stated, "the committee has reversed its preliminary decision. The property at 1251 Orchid Street does not meet the necessary criteria for sufficient historical uniqueness to warrant landmark designation." New information provided. She knew exactly who had provided it. Aura's lobbyists with their deep pockets and political connections had gotten to the committee. Her trump card, her shield, was gone. The news spread through the community like a virus, and with it, the last vestiges of their fighting spirit seemed to evaporate. The landmark status had been a symbol of hope, a sign that their history mattered. Its denial felt like a final judgment. They were not unique. They were not worth preserving. That same week, Mrs. Nguyen, her staunchest supporter, collapsed from exhaustion in her restaurant. It was a health scare, a severe bout of hypertension brought on by stress. Her children, who lived in the suburbs and had always been wary of the fight, rushed to her side. They found Mai in the shop the next day, their faces a mixture of fear and anger. "This has to stop," Mrs. Nguyen's son said, his voice tight. "My mother is 72 years old. She can't take this stress, this fight. It's hurting the people you claim to be protecting. For her sake, for the good of all the elders, you have to give up." His words hit Mai harder than any legal threat. Was he right? Was her stubbornness causing more harm than good? The weight of that question was crushing. The day ended with a torrential downpour, the sky weeping as if in sympathy. Mai was cleaning out her grandmother's old desk in the upstairs apartment, looking for a distraction, when she found a hidden compartment in the back of a drawer. Inside was a folder of old documents. One of them was the original deed to the shop. As she read through the dense legal text, her eyes landed on a clause she'd never seen before. A lien, a massive one. It was a debt her grandmother had taken on years ago, using the shop as collateral to help a neighbor whose business was failing. The neighbor had eventually gone bankrupt, and the debt had lain dormant, passed from one financial institution to another over the years. The amount, with accumulated interest, was staggering. It was more than the shop was worth. A cold dread washed over her. She called the bank listed on the document. The man on the phone was polite but detached. "Yes, ma'am, that debt is still active," he said. "In fact, it was recently purchased by a private investment firm. Let me see. Yes, a company called Viridian Capital." He paused. "And it looks like they've just called the note due. You have 30 days to pay the full amount." Viridian Capital. Mai typed the name into her laptop's search bar. The results were sparse, a generic website with no real information. But when she cross-referenced it with Aura Wellness, she found it. A shell company, wholly owned by Holloway's Corporation. It was a perfect trap. He had bought her grandmother's secret, compassionate debt and turned it into a weapon. She was financially trapped. The historical designation was gone. Her community was divided and demoralized. Her staunchest supporter was ill. She was emotionally, financially, and spiritually defeated. The shop, her grandmother's legacy, the heart of her community, was as good as his. The rain lashed against the window, and for the first time, Mai truly believed that all was lost. And now we come to it, the dark night of the soul. It's a moment I think we've all felt in some way, when you've given a fight everything you have, and it still wasn't enough. When the walls are closing in and every door seems to be locked. This is the point where surrender feels less like a choice and more like a simple acknowledgement of reality. Mai was there in the dark, with the weight of it all pressing down on her. But sometimes, it's only when we're in total darkness that we can finally see a different kind of light. The shop was silent, save for the rhythmic drumming of rain against the roof and the mournful groan of the old building settling. Mai sat on a low stool in the center of the room, the foreclosure notice clutched in her hand, the paper limp from the humidity and the dampness of her palm. The air was thick with the scent of herbs, a scent that had once felt like a comforting embrace, but now felt like a funeral shroud. She was ready to give up. All her efforts, all the workshops, the blog posts, the CSA boxes, they felt like a child's sandcastle built in the path of a tsunami. She hadn't just failed to save the shop, she had actively made things worse. She had divided her community, put Mrs. Nguyen's health at risk, and led everyone on a hopeful charge straight into a wall of corporate power. The guilt was a physical ache in her chest. She stood up and walked numbly to the counter, picking up an empty cardboard box. She started with her grandmother's journal, the leather cover cool beneath her fingers. This was the source of it all, the catalyst for her foolish, idealistic fight. She held it for a moment, then placed it gently inside the box, the first step in packing up a life, in surrendering a legacy. She would call Holloway's lawyer in the morning. She would hand over the keys. She would walk away and try to piece her own orderly life back together, even though she knew it would never be the same. She sank back onto the stool, the open box at her feet, and stared into the darkness. Her eyes fell on the wall of wooden drawers, the hundreds of labels she still couldn't read. She thought of her grandmother, of the strength it must have taken to build this place, to sustain it, to be the anchor for so many people for so many years. And then her grandmother's words, the ones from the journal, echoed in her mind, clear as the chiming of the shop's bell. The strength is in the roots. She had thought she understood them. She thought the roots were the traditions, the knowledge, the history. She thought her job was to be the strong trunk, the main tree, protecting those roots from the storm. But as she sat there in her despair, a different, more profound understanding bloomed in the darkness of her mind. She had been trying to be the entire tree herself. She had been fighting asterisk for the community, but not with the community. She had seen herself as their champion, their solitary hero. She was filming the elders, designing the infographics, managing the subscriptions. But the legacy was never meant to be hers alone. The wisdom in that journal wasn't just a set of instructions, it was a record of interconnectedness. The strength wasn't just in the historical roots, it was in the living roots. The network of people, Mrs. Nguyen's stories, Mr. Tran's kindness, Bao's passion, even Kevin, the bakery owner with his pragmatic fears, they were all part of the root system. Her grandmother hadn't been a solitary hero. She had been a hub, a node in a network of care and mutual support. She didn't just give people remedies, she sat with them, listened to them, connected them. The debt that was now being used to destroy the shop was taken on to help a neighbor. It was an act of communal support. Mai looked at the foreclosure notice at the box with the journal at the dark, silent shop. She realized her mistake. She had been trying to win a corporate battle using corporate tactics, branding, marketing, legal shields. But this wasn't a corporate battle. This was a community's fight for survival. And you don't fight that kind of battle alone. A profound clarity washed over her, clearing away the fog of despair. She knew what she had to do. The plan that began to form in her mind was terrifying, audacious, and felt, for the first time, absolutely right. The rain had stopped by morning. The air was washed clean, and a fragile, watery sunlight was beginning to filter through the clouds. Mai didn't call Holloway's lawyer. She didn't pack another box. Instead, she picked up her phone and called Bao. "I have an idea," she said, her voice filled with a conviction that surprised even herself. "And I need your help to call a meeting. Not just the elders, everyone." That evening, the small garden behind the apothecary was filled with people. Bao had worked his magic, reaching out through text chains, social media groups, and old-fashioned phone calls. The elders were there, sitting on mismatched chairs Mai had borrowed from the fuss shop. The younger business owners, including a shame-faced Kevin, stood awkwardly in the back. Her own parents, drawn by the urgency in her voice, were there too. The mood was somber, heavy with the news of the foreclosure. They expected a eulogy. They expected her to announce her surrender. Mai stood before them, a large whiteboard propped up on an easel behind her. She looked out at their worried faces, and for the first time, she didn't feel the weight of their expectations. She felt the strength of their presence. "I know you all heard about the foreclosure," she began, her voice clear and steady. "And I know many of you think this is the end. I thought so too. Last night I was ready to give up." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I was ready to hand the keys to Preston Holloway, because I thought this was my fight to win or lose, and I lost." She looked directly at Mrs. Nguyen's son. "I was wrong. I thought I was protecting a legacy, but I forgot what that legacy really is. It isn't this building. It's not the herbs in those drawers. It's us, all of us, connected." She then laid everything bare. She told them about the shell company, the predatory acquisition of the debt, the full extent of Holloway's tactics. She didn't spare herself, admitting her own pride and her folly in trying to fight him alone. "But he made a mistake," she said, a spark igniting in her eyes. "He thinks this is just a piece of real estate. He thinks our culture is just content. He doesn't understand the one thing my grandmother knew better than anyone. The strength is in the roots." She turned to the whiteboard. "I don't have the money to fight him, but he's not fighting one person. He's fighting a community, so my idea is this." She uncapped a marker. "We stop thinking of this as my shop, and we start thinking of it as our asterisk shop." Using her design skills, she began to sketch out a plan, not with legalese, but with diagrams and simple, powerful words. She proposed a community cooperative, a trust. We transform V letter 1B0 letter 1EDD and THU letter 1ED1CC letter 1EE7, a BA from a private business into a community-owned asset, she explained, her marker flying across the board. Every one of us can own a piece. We won't be asking for donations. We'll be asking for investors, for partners. She laid out the structure. People could buy shares, each share representing a vote. It wouldn't just be about money. People could contribute their skills. Kevin, the baker, was a marketing genius. Another woman ran a successful accounting business. Bao was a storyteller. The elders were the keepers of the knowledge. It will be our shared legacy, she said, her voice ringing with passion. Our collective roots. Holloway can't foreclose on 100 families. He can't fight an entire neighborhood. We will buy the debt ourselves. We will own our own heart. A murmur went through the crowd. It was a radical idea. It was risky, but it was also brilliant. It was a solution synthesized from her old world of business structures and her new world of communal values. It wasn't about defiance. It was about empowerment. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope returned to their eyes. They weren't just victims anymore. She had given them a plan to become architects of their own future. What followed was a storm. A beautiful, chaotic, community-powered storm. The finale wasn't a single event, but a multi-pronged execution of Mai's plan, a grassroots uprising against a corporate Goliath. First came the fundraiser, but it wasn't a sad, desperate plea for money. Bao, using his organizing skills, transformed it into a massive street festival, a Save the Garden event that was a full-throated celebration of Little Saigon's culture. They got the city permits to shut down the block for a whole Saturday. It was an explosion of life and color right on Aura Wellness's sterile doorstep. Food stalls lined the street. The scent of grilling pork from the banh mi stand mingled with the sweet smell of waffles from Kevin's bakery and the rich, star anise-scented steam from Mrs. Nguyen's pho cart. A stage was set up where local musicians played traditional instruments, their melodies weaving through the air. Craft vendors sold handmade goods. The entire community participated. And in a powerful, public act of reconciliation, Kevin and the other young business owners who had previously sided with Aura made a statement. They stood on the stage and announced they were pulling all Aura products from their shelves. Kevin spoke into the microphone, his voice emotional. I thought adapting meant letting a piece of us be sold. I was wrong. Adapting means fighting for what's ours together. They then passionately promoted the co-op, urging everyone to invest in their own community, not a corporation that saw them as a marketing demographic. It was a turning point. The rift was healed, the community stronger than ever. While the festival raged on the street, the digital counterattack was launched. Mai and Bao had been working with the journalist who wrote the first positive story about the shop. They had spent days gathering evidence, documents proving Aura's ownership of the shell company, testimony from other small business owners in other cities who had been targeted by Holloway's predatory tactics, a full financial breakdown of the fraudulent debt acquisition. They gave him the exclusive. Just as the festival reached its peak in the afternoon, the story broke online. The headline was devastating. Wellness giant accused of predatory practices in bid to co-opt immigrant communities' heritage. The article was a meticulously researched piece of investigative journalism, laying bare Holloway's entire strategy. It went viral almost instantly. Bao had mobilized a network of Asian American influencers and activists who shared it with their massive followings. Mai's own thousands of authentic followers pushed it further. Within an hour, the #the strength is in the roots was trending nationally. The PR disaster was so immediate and so catastrophic that Preston Holloway himself showed up. He arrived in his black town car, his face pale, his perfect suit looking rumpled for the first time. He clearly intended to do damage control, to get on the stage and spin some story about misunderstandings and his deep love for their culture. He strode towards the stage, his press person clearing a path, but Mai met him at the steps. She was calm, centered, and surrounded by the vibrant energy of the festival. The news cameras, already there to cover the event, swarmed around them. Holloway tried to smile, the mask of empathy slipping badly. Lynn, Mai, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. We can work this out. Mai didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She spoke with a quiet power that cut through the noise. "This shop is not for sale. It's not a property, Mr. Holloway, it's a legacy." She then gestured to the crowd around them, to the faces of the elders and the children, the shopkeepers and the families. "And now it belongs to all of us." As she spoke, the community members, Mrs. Nguyen, Mr. Tran, Kevin, her parents, dozens of others, moved to stand behind her. They didn't say a word. They just stood there, a silent, powerful, unbreachable wall of unity. Holloway looked from Mai's resolute face to the sea of determined faces behind her, and then to the news cameras capturing his public humiliation. There was nothing to say, no deal to be made, no one to bully. He had tried to buy a flower, and he had come face to face with an entire forest. Defeated, he turned and retreated to his car, swallowed by the crowd's silent victory. The fundraiser was a staggering success. By the end of the night, they had raised more than enough money from co-op shares to pay off the predatory loan in full. The next morning, Mai, accompanied by Mrs. Nguyen and Bao, walked into the bank and paid it off. The negative press from the viral article was a stake through the heart of Aura Wellness's Ancient Roots campaign. Their stock price took a significant hit. Facing boycotts and a PR nightmare, the corporation was forced to issue a public apology. A month later, the "For Lease" sign was back up on the storefront across the street. The cooperative was officially formed, and at their first meeting, Linh Mai Tran was unanimously elected as its first director. A year later, the bell on the shop door chimed. But it was Mai standing there, overwhelmed and alone. It was a young student from the local university, coming in for her volunteer shift. The apothecary, V letter 1B0 letter 1EDDNTHU letter 1ED1CC letter 1E7 Aba, was humming with a new kind of life. It had been beautifully restored, the old wood gleaming, the drawers meticulously organized, but it had lost none of its soul. In fact, its soul was now bigger, more vibrant than ever. The shop was full of people. In one corner, Mrs. Nguyen was teaching a group of teenagers how to identify different types of ginseng root. In the back garden, a group of elementary school children were planting herbs in raised beds, part of a new partnership with a local school. At a small table near the window, Bao and two other young co-op members were managing the co-op's website and national shipping orders, their laptops sitting next to steaming bowls of tea. The community-supported apothecary box now had a waiting list and was being shipped to customers in 20 different states. Mai stood behind the counter, not as a graphic designer playing a role, but as a leader, a teacher, a bridge between the past and the future. She was grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle, the rhythmic sound a steady heartbeat for the bustling room. She no longer felt like an outsider. This place, these people, this work, it was in her bones. It was who she was. She picked up a new journal, this one a large, cloth-bound ledger. It was the co-op's journal. On the first page, she had written her grandmother's words, "The strength is in the roots." Now, she opened it to a new page and began to write, documenting a new remedy they had perfected, adding the names of the people who had contributed to its creation. It wasn't just her grandmother's knowledge anymore. It was a living, breathing document of collective wisdom. She looked up out the front window. The sterile Aura Wellness storefront across the street was now a thriving Vietnamese bakery run by Kevin and his family. The street was vibrant, a place she hadn't just saved, but had helped empower. She had won not by defeating an enemy, but by building something so strong, so authentic, and so deeply rooted in community that it simply couldn't be broken. A genuine, peaceful smile spread across her face, a smile that reached her eyes. She was finally home. So often, we think of revenge as an act of destruction, of tearing something down. But what if the most powerful revenge is an act of creation? My story isn't about getting even with Preston Holloway. His company faltered, yes, but that was just a side effect. Her true victory was in the building. She didn't just save a shop, she rebuilt a community. She rediscovered her own identity not by fighting the man who tried to steal her heritage, but by embracing it so fully that it became a beacon for others. She learned that our roots aren't just about where we come from, they're about what we choose to nurture together. Her grandmother's legacy wasn't in a jar or a journal. It was in the connections between people, the web of support that makes a community unbreakable. What would you have done in her shoes? When is it right to walk away, and when is it right to stay and fight for something that's bigger than yourself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm Serena, and this has been Revenge Pains. Thank you for listening.